The alarm didn't wake him. He hadn't slept. Ethan Cole had been sitting at the kitchen table since 2 in the morning. One hand wrapped around a mug gone cold, the other flat on the surface of the table as if he needed to feel something solid. The house around him was the particular kind of quiet that only exists in the hours before dawn. Not peaceful, not restful, just empty. Just the absence of everything that had filled it for the last 4 years. Maya's backpack hung by the door. Pink. Covered in iron-on patches she'd collected from every gas station road trip since she was 4. A sunflower. A fox with sunglasses. One that said I'd rather be napping, which she'd found funny, even though she didn't fully understand it yet. She was 7 now. She would be 8 in March. She was at her grandmother's house in Denver. 3 days. 3 days was all he'd asked for. His mother hadn't questioned it. She'd looked at him when she picked Maya up and said nothing. Just squeezed Hoover's arm at the door and kept walking. She was good at that. Reading the situation and not making it worse. Ethan stood up from the table. He rinsed the mug. He dried it. He put it back in exactly the right cabinet. He had been a careful man for 4 years, careful about the dishes and the bedtime routines and the correct temperature for Maya's bath and the right way to pack her lunch so the sandwich didn't get soggy. Careful about work, about weekends, about the exact tone of voice to use when she was tired and melting down and needed him to be steady. He had been so careful for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be reckless. He had forgotten what it felt like to want something just for himself. The bag was already packed. It had been sitting by the door since yesterday afternoon. One mid-sized duffel, dark green, minimal. No toys. No snacks for a small person. No extra pair of child-sized gloves because Maya was always losing hers. Just his things. Just enough for 4 days in Aspen with no plan. He'd booked the cabin 3 weeks ago, on a Wednesday night after Maya fell asleep, sitting in the dark in his own room with the laptop open and the credit card out before he could change his mind. He'd paid for it. He was going. Outside. The snow had started again. Aspen in February was not a gentle experience. The mountains didn't care about schedules or emotional states, or the very specific kind of tired that sets in when you've been someone's entire world for 4 years straight. The mountains were just there, massive and white and indifferent. That was, in some strange way, exactly what he needed. Something that didn't need anything back. He pulled on his jacket. He picked up the duffel. The street outside was dark, except for the orange wash of one streetlight half a block down, and the snow was falling sideways now, the kind that stings when it hits your face. His truck was parked at the curb. He'd scraped the windshield last night so he wouldn't have to this morning. Careful. Always. He was loading the bag into the back when he heard it. A sound soft, deliberate, rhythmic, coming from the direction of the house next door. He didn't turn immediately. He thought it was the wind at first, or something shifting under the weight of accumulated snow, but it kept coming, steady and real. He turned. She was at the end of her driveway, navigating the narrow path she must have shoveled herself, or had someone shovel through the overnight accumulation. Her wheelchair was one of the sleek, lightweight kind, carbon frame. The kind that looked engineered rather than medical. She was wearing a wool coat the color of charcoal and a scarf that covered her chin, and she was pushing a small rolling suitcase ahead of her while she moved. He knew her. Not well, but enough. Lena Hart. They'd spoken maybe a dozen times in the 2 years she'd lived next door, once about the noise from a late-night delivery truck, once when Maya had kicked a ball into Lena's yard and Ethan had knocked to retrieve it. A few times just in passing. She was always composed. Always like she was the calmest person in any given situation, which was impressive because the situations she navigated on a daily basis were by any objective measure difficult. Cole. Her voice was clear in the cold air. He looked at her. The suitcase. The way she'd already made it to the end of her driveway and was moving toward his truck with obvious intention. Hart, he said. Because what else do you say? I need a ride to Aspen. He blinked. It's 5 in the morning. I know. There's a storm. I can see that. She stopped at the back of his truck. She looked at the duffel he'd just loaded, and then looked at him. Her eyes were gray in this light, or maybe dark blue, he'd never been sure. "You're going anyway." "That's yes." "Then I'm coming with you." He stood there in the snow, holding his car keys, completely at a loss. "Lena." He said it carefully. "I was going alone on purpose." "I know. He stopped. Started again. "That's kind of the whole point." She looked at him steadily. She didn't appear embarrassed, or pushy, or like she was asking a favor. She appeared like someone who had made a decision and was waiting for the logistics to catch up. "I'm not going to talk to you if you don't want me to," she said. "I'm not going to need anything from you. I have my own cabin reserved 20 minutes from wherever you're going. I just need a ride. And you're the only person I know who's driving up there in a blizzard at 5 in the morning. Which suggests your judgment is questionable enough that you might actually say yes." He almost laughed. It surprised him, the almost of it. He looked at her suitcase. He looked at the street, empty in every direction, the snow filling in every footprint almost as fast as it was made. "I'm not good company right now," he said. "Neither am I," she said. He opened the tailgate. The wheelchair folded. That was the first thing he learned. He hadn't known, though he should have. He'd seen her moving around for 2 years, but the chair collapsed in a specific sequence. Footrests first, then frame, then the whole thing compressed into something he could lift and fit easily behind the back seat. She did it herself, standing briefly on her arms against the door frame while he positioned the folded chair. She moved from chair to seat, like someone who had done it 10,000 times, which she had. She buckled in. He started the engine. Neither of them said anything for a while. The heater took a few minutes to reach the far side of the cab, and until it did, their breath fogged slightly in the dark interior. He pulled out of the neighborhood slowly. The roads were already bad, just passable. He knew pieces of her story the way you know things about neighbors, through observation and the occasional remark. She ran a tech company, Heart Systems, maybe something like that. She'd bought the house next door 2 years ago and had it modified before she moved in. Lower counters and widened doorways, and a ramp instead of the 3 front steps. She worked late hours. She received a lot of packages. She had a cleaner who came twice a week, and someone who handled her yard. And beyond that, she appeared to manage entirely on her own. She'd been in the chair for 6 years, he thought. He'd heard that once, from Mrs. Dawson across the street, who knew everything about everyone, without ever appearing to try. What he didn't know was why she'd knocked on his door, metaphorically speaking, at 5 in the morning with a suitcase. He didn't ask. Not yet. The roads demanded his attention. And besides, he wasn't sure he had the right. Lena had a bag between her feet and a camera case on her lap, which struck him as odd, but he filed it away. She looked out the passenger window. The city gave way to highway, which gave way to interstate, which gave way to mountain road. And through all of it, the snow kept falling in great soft curtains that the headlights turned into static. He had not felt this calm, and he tried to count back. He couldn't. There was something about being in motion in the dark that loosened things. He'd always been like that. As a kid, long car rides had been the only time his brain stopped its constant cycling. Even now, with everything, there was something about the white lines appearing and disappearing ahead of the truck that let him exist for a moment without calculating what came next. He had been calculating what came next for 4 years. Maya's mother, Claire, had left when Maya was 3. Not dramatically. Not with a fight that could be pointed to and analyzed. She had simply become less and less present over a period of about 8 months. And then one day, she had sat down across from Ethan at the kitchen table. The same kitchen table where he'd sat this morning, and said she was leaving. She said it quietly. She said she was sorry. She said she loved Maya, but she couldn't stay. And she knew what that meant. And she was sorry. She'd moved to Seattle. She sent birthday cards. She called on holidays, sometimes. Maya asked about her occasionally, in the matter-of-fact way children have when a thing has simply become the shape of their world. Ethan had never remarried. He dated someone briefly about 18 months after. And it had ended amicably because neither of them had been ready. and they'd both known it. Since then, nothing. Not for lack of opportunity, maybe, but for lack of space. There was no room. Every pocket of his life was occupied by something that needed doing, and he had told himself that was fine. That this was just the season he was in. That eventually, there would be time. He was 34 years old. He didn't know what eventually meant anymore. "You didn't sleep last night," Lena said. He glanced at her. She was still looking out the window. "That obvious?" "You have the look," she said. That particular kind of alert that isn't really alert. Like someone running on fumes and adrenaline. "How do you know what that looks like?" "I've run a company for 8 years, she said. "I've seen it in the mirror a lot." He said nothing. Outside, the mountains were becoming shapes in the darkness. Enormous. Darker than the sky. Lena Hart, he thought. 36 or 37, maybe. The kind of person who described herself in terms of what she'd built, not what had happened to her. He'd picked that up in passing. She didn't lean into the chair as part of her identity. It was just a fact of her physical reality, like height or eye color. He found himself wondering, for the first time, what it had cost her to get there. To that particular kind of composure, he didn't ask that either. "There's coffee in the thermos," he said instead. "Behind your seat." She reached back and found it without asking him to help. That, too, he filed away. 2 hours passed this way. The road climbed. The snow thickened and thinned and thickened again, and Ethan drove with both hands on the wheel and his attention fully on the road ahead, which was fine because attention on the road meant attention away from everything else. Lena drank coffee. She looked out her window. Occasionally, she shifted the camera case on her lap, repositioning it, not opening it. The radio was on low. Something instrumental. Forgettable. Which was exactly right. Around the 2-hour mark, as the sky began to show its first gray ideas of light, Ethan's shoulders dropped approximately half an inch. He didn't notice until it had already happened. "You're relaxing," Lena said. He hadn't thought she was paying attention. "Little bit," he said. "First time in a while." He thought about it honestly. "Yeah. First time in a while." She nodded, like she'd expected that answer. The light was doing something strange and beautiful ahead. The snow on the road, and the snow on the trees, and the snow on the distant peaks, all at slightly different brightnesses, layered, so the landscape looked almost painted. Staged. He thought about mentioning it, and then didn't. Then she said, "You can ask." He glanced at her. "Ask what?" "Why I got in your truck at 5 in the morning with a suitcase." She looked at him steadily. People always want to ask. Most of them don't. Because they think it's impolite. "Is it impolite?" "Not if you actually want to know," she said. "It is if you're just being polite." He considered the road ahead, the way it curved into the trees and disappeared. "I actually want to know," he said. She was quiet for a moment. The camera case shifted slightly on her lap, her hand resting on top of it without opening it, like something kept close for reasons that had nothing to do with immediate use. "I had a board meeting on Thursday," she said. "My chief operating officer, a man who has worked for me for 5 years, presented a proposal to restructure the leadership team. He sent it to 3 board members before he sent it to me. He'd been building consensus behind my back for 2 months." She paused. The proposal included a recommendation to bring in an executive co-director to handle operational decisions, framed as support. It was a very polite way of suggesting I wasn't capable of running my own company. Ethan said nothing. He waited. I didn't react. I sat through the whole meeting, and I took notes, and I said I would review everything carefully, and then I went home, and I sat in my house, and I thought about all the things I should have said, and all the things I will say on Monday. And none of that helped. She looked back out the window. "I needed to be somewhere that wasn't there," she said. "I looked at my phone at 3 in the morning, and I saw your lights on, and your truck in the driveway, and I thought." She stopped. Shrugged once. "I thought, someone else is also leaving. Maybe they'll take me." He absorbed this. "That's a lot to carry into someone's truck," he said. "I know. She almost smiled. "You're still driving." "I'm still driving," he agreed. The town of Basalt appeared briefly through the trees, and then disappeared again as the road climbed. The sky was definitely lightening now, a cold, clean gray that would eventually be blue. "What's the camera for?" he asked. Something changed in her face. Not much. Just a slight settling, like a door closing gently without being slammed. "I used to be a photographer," she said. He waited. "Before," she added. "Before the accident. Before all of this." Her hand moved on the camera case without opening it. "I was good, not great maybe, but really good." "What kind?" "Landscapes, mostly. And some portraiture. I spent 3 months in Iceland 1 year." A pause. I don't really shoot anymore, but you brought the camera." "I always bring the camera," she said. "I never take it out." He looked at the road. He looked at the mountains beyond the trees, beginning to emerge in the growing gray light. "Why not?" he asked. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. "Because I don't know if I'm still the person who could do it," she said finally. "And I don't want to find out that I'm not." They stopped just before 8. There was a diner, the kind that had existed in exactly this form since approximately 1974, at a junction where the mountain roads split. It had a gravel lot that hadn't been plowed, a blinking open sign in the window. 2 other vehicles, both trucks. Ethan pulled in without asking. "Coffee," he said. "And something to eat." "I haven't." He stopped. He couldn't remember when he'd last had a real meal. Yesterday morning, maybe. Maybe the morning before that. "Yes," she said. The transfer from truck to chair happened in the gravel lot, with a pragmatic efficiency that Ethan was beginning to understand was her default mode. She didn't look at him while she did it. She didn't look away either. She just moved, and he was there if she needed a stabilizing hand on the doorframe. And she didn't. The diner had a step at the entrance. He noticed it before she did. Or maybe she'd already calculated it. There was a wooden board propped against the wall beside the door, clearly used as a ramp. She positioned it herself with one end of her chair while he held the door. Inside, red vinyl booths, laminate tabletops, the smell of bacon and coffee, and something sweet baking somewhere in the back. A woman behind the counter with white hair pinned up and reading glasses on a chain around her neck looked at them with the particular unbothered warmth of someone who had seen every kind of person come through this door and found them all equally worth feeding. "Sit wherever," she said. Lena chose the booth by the window. The table was fixed, so there was a gap at one end where her chair could be positioned. She navigated it without drama. They ordered coffee immediately. Eggs, toast, hash browns for him. Oatmeal and fruit for her. The window was large and faced the mountain, and through it the entire landscape was doing something extraordinary. The low clouds had parted just enough to let a band of light through, apricot and gold, cutting across the middle distance where the snow-covered slopes met the tree line. It lasted maybe 4 minutes. It was, objectively, one of the more beautiful things Ethan had seen in years, and he'd been living in Colorado his whole adult life. He was watching it when he heard the sound. Soft, mechanical, the shutter of a camera. He looked over slowly. Lena had the camera out. She must have taken it from the case while he wasn't paying attention, and she was holding it up, angled toward the window. She took one frame, then lowered it immediately, like she'd done something she wasn't sure she should have. He looked back at the window. The band of light was fading already. He didn't say anything. She put the camera back in the case. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Outside, the clouds closed again, and the mountains went back to gray. "You took one," he said. "Don't make a thing of it," she said. "I'm not." He poured more coffee. "I'm just noting it." She looked at him across the table, and for a moment, her face was doing something he hadn't seen yet, something that might, in other circumstances, have been called vulnerable. It was there, and then it wasn't. "It's one photograph," she said. "It's a start," he said. "It's one photograph," she repeated, but without heat. The food came. They ate. The woman behind the counter had the radio on classic country, soft enough to be weather rather than music. Outside, the snow had stopped temporarily, and the world looked freshly assembled. Ethan finished his eggs. He pushed the plate aside. He looked at the window. "My daughter thinks I'm a hero," he said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way things do when you're tired enough that the gates stop working. Lena looked at him. "She's 7, he said. "She has this whole idea of who I am. This dad who knows everything and handles everything and isn't scared of anything." He picked up his coffee mug, and most of the time I look at her, and I think how long before she figures out I'm improvising every single day. How long before she realizes I have no idea what I'm doing. The diner was quiet around them. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post at the edge of the lot and then departed. "How long has it been just the two of you?" Lena asked. 4 years. She was 3. "What happened?" "Her mother left." He said it plainly. It was a plain thing, now, not suddenly. It was slow, and then it was done. Maya barely remembers it. "And you?" He looked up. "Do you barely remember it?" Lena asked. He set down the mug. "No," he said. "I remember it fine." They were back on the road by 9. The snow started again around 9:30, lighter this time, almost delicate, the kind of snow that was decorative rather than dangerous, each flake large and slow and distinct. The mountains had come fully into view by now, close enough to be dimensional rather than just backdrop. Ethan drove and thought about what he'd said in the diner, and was not, surprisingly, embarrassed by it. There was something about this particular situation, 2 people going somewhere with no requirement to be anyone in particular, that made the truth easier. He'd been very careful with the truth for a long time. With Maya, he filtered everything through a question. Will this make her worry? With coworkers, there was the professional surface to maintain. With his mother, there was the need to appear coping because she was going to worry no matter what, and he didn't want to give her more material. In this truck, with this woman he barely knew, there was no filtering mechanism to construct. "What's the company?" he asked. They'd been quiet for a stretch. "Heart Systems," she said. "We make workflow integration software for enterprise clients." Boring. On paper. Useful in practice. "How big?" 83 people, currently. She said it the way people who've built something from nothing say numbers, with awareness of what each one represents. Started with 4. "How old were you?" 28. He did the math. "That's young." It felt old at the time. She looked at the trees going past. "I'd been working in tech since I was 22. By 28, I'd been a junior developer, a senior developer, a team lead, and then a director at someone else's company. I'd done everything I was going to learn in that structure, so I left and started my own. And 2 years into that, yes." She said it without drama. "Car accident. Interstate. Ice. Much like this. Which is why you should know I'm fully aware of the irony." Her voice was dry, factual, fractured 3 vertebrae. There was a period where it wasn't clear how much function I'd recover. I recovered more than the early prognosis suggested, and less than I wanted. "And you kept going." "And I kept going," she agreed. That part people always say like it's simple. Like keeping going is the obvious thing, and the only alternative would have been to stop, which no one reasonable would do, wasn't it? She turned to look at him. Keeping going when everything has changed is not simple. It is very, very hard. It just looks simple from outside, because the alternative isn't visible. He thought about that. The road curved and the valley opened below them, a long, flat run of white. The town of Carbondale, just barely visible, as a cluster of rooftops. Beautiful, severe. "What's the alternative?" he asked. "Disappearing," she said. "Not dying, just contracting, getting smaller and smaller until you only occupy the spaces that are easiest to occupy, and everything you used to be interested in and want and reach for becomes something you used to do." She paused. "A lot of people do it. They don't mean to. It just happens gradually." "Is that what happened with the photography?" She was quiet for a moment. "The photography happened the other way," she said. "I chose to stop. Actively. Because it was the thing I loved most before. and I was afraid to find out if I still could. If it would feel the same. She looked at her hands, which were in her lap. Some things you don't want to touch because you're afraid of what it'll tell you about who you've become. Ethan nodded slowly. He understood that, though he wouldn't have been able to say so in those words. "What was yours?" she asked. "My what?" "Your thing you stopped doing because it was easier not to." He drove. He thought about deflecting, and then didn't. "I used to draw," he said. "Architectural sketches, mostly. I studied architecture for 2 years before I switched to construction management. I was decent. Not exceptional, but decent." He rubbed the back of his neck briefly with one hand before returning it to the wheel. "I haven't drawn anything in 4 years. Since she was 3, he confirmed. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. Fuller, maybe. Like a room that has furniture in it now. "Do you miss it?" Lena asked. "I don't let myself," he said. She didn't say anything to that. She didn't have to. They reached Aspen at 11:15. It was, in the way of genuinely beautiful places, almost aggressive in its beauty, the mountains right there, immediate, the town itself arranged at their feet like an offering, everything white and clean except for the buildings, which were warm-colored. The smoke from chimneys moving straight up in the still air. He helped her navigate the cabin check-in process. Hers was first, closer to town, and it was, as advertised, fully accessible. Ground floor, wide doorways, roll-in shower. Whoever had booked it had known what to look for. She thanked the property manager with the kind of practiced, efficient courtesy that took none of the warmth out of it. His cabin was 12 minutes further, up a narrow road that climbed steeply and then leveled onto a small plateau, smaller than hers. Just a main room and a kitchen and a sleeping loft he could access by ladder, and a wide porch that faced the mountain directly. He stood on that porch for a long moment after carrying his bag inside. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't check anything. He just stood there. He thought about calling Maya. She'd be awake by now, having breakfast at his mother's house. He'd call tonight. He'd told her he'd call tonight. And he would. And she would be fine. His mother would make pancakes shaped like animals, and Maya would have forgotten he was gone within approximately 45 minutes of arriving. He was not indispensable. This was both a relief and a thing he was still learning to accept. Lena texted him at 2. "Settled in. Would you want to walk somewhere? Drive somewhere? Whatever." He'd been sitting with a book he hadn't opened. "There's a viewpoint," he replied. 20 minutes from here." Roads plowed. He drove to her cabin. She was outside already. Camera case on her lap. The viewpoint was a pull-off on a county road, marked by a single wooden post with a small sign. From it, you could see the entire valley and 3 distinct mountain peaks, and, in the right light, the faint, dark line of the Continental Divide beyond. He'd been here once before, years ago, before Maya, when he and a friend had driven up for a ski weekend. He parked. He got out. He walked to the railing. Behind him. The sound of the chair on the packed snow. Steady and unhurried. She pulled up beside him. They stood, or sat, and stood, and looked. The light was doing the late afternoon thing it does in February in the Rockies, when the sun is already low and hits the snow at a flat angle, and the shadows are long and blue, and the lit surfaces glow almost orange. The peaks were sharper in this light, more defined. Lena took out the camera. She didn't put it to her eye immediately. She held it in her lap and looked at the view without it first. Like she was deciding something, or remembering something. Then she lifted it. She shot for 20 minutes. Not constantly, not like she was covering the scene, but with long pauses between, where she'd lower the camera and just look, and then raise it again. He stood nearby and watched the light change, which it did constantly, which was the only thing it had to do. He didn't speak. He didn't feel the need to speak. Afterward, she put the camera back in the case and rested her hands on the railing. Her breath fogged slightly in the cold. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "My spinal condition has been progressing," she said. "Not dramatically, but consistently. I saw 2 different specialists in the past 6 months, and they both said the same thing. which is that the trajectory is unlikely to reverse. She paused, which means the function I have now is probably approximately the function I'll have for the rest of my life, and the question is whether I manage it carefully enough to hold that level, or whether I don't and I lose ground. He was very still. My COO doesn't know this, she said. The board doesn't know it. Almost no one knows it. She looked at the mountains. I haven't said it out loud to another person. I've said it to myself many times, in many different ways, but not out loud. He looked at her profile. The clean line of her jaw. The way she was looking at the mountains, like she was trying to memorize them. Why me? He asked. Why tell me? She was quiet for a moment. Because you're not inside my life, she said. You're the neighbor. You're someone I've passed on the driveway. You have no stake in what I do with this information. She turned to look at him. And because you've been honest with me today, and it seems like the right thing to do in return. He held her gaze. That's a lot of weight, he said. Yes. She looked back at the mountains. That's why I'm not disappearing. That's why I'm in this parking lot in February looking at mountains instead of sitting in my house thinking about what I should have said to Gerald. She said the name with a particular flatness. The COO, presumably. Because the alternative is getting smaller. You said that before. Contracting, I believe it deeply, she said. I have seen it happen to people. And I refuse. He looked at the mountains. He thought about the word refuse, and the amount of energy it takes to refuse things to hold the line against the contraction. That is, apparently, the path of least resistance. He thought about his own small contractions, the drawing he'd given up, the relationships he hadn't pursued, the ways he'd made himself smaller and smaller until the space he occupied was exactly and only the shape of Maya's needs. I'm not enough for her, he said. Lena looked at him. Maya. He kept his eyes on the mountains. She needs me to be her dad, and I am. But she's going to need people around her who aren't me. She's going to need me to have a life that isn't only her. And I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be more than what I've become. He exhaled slowly. I've been so good at being careful. And I don't know what I am. If I'm not careful. The light shifted. One peak went from orange to a cold white as a cloud moved. You're someone who drove into a blizzard at 5 in the morning on no sleep with no plan, Lena said. That's not particularly careful. He almost laughed. This time it actually came out. It was small and brief, and the cold air took it immediately. But it was real. They ate dinner at a restaurant in town. Not a special place, a casual Italian with mismatched chairs and candles and wine bottles, and a menu printed on brown paper. It had been her suggestion and he'd agreed immediately. He'd called Maya at 6:30 from the restaurant parking lot, standing outside with his breath fogging. She'd been in the middle of something with his mother, something involving finger paints, from the sound of it, and she'd spoken to him for about 3 minutes with the characteristic distraction of a child who is perfectly fine and too busy to prove it. Love you, Dad. Love you, Bug. Grandma says I can make a dog. A finger paint dog. A clay dog. She has clay. That's exciting. I know. Bye. The call ended. He stood in the parking lot in the cold for another moment, holding his phone, feeling something he didn't immediately have a word for. It was somewhere between relief and grief, and a very particular kind of love, the kind that aches because it's real. He went inside. Lena was at the table. She'd taken off her coat, and her scarf and the sweater underneath was the kind of dark green that looked like it cost real money. She had her phone face down on the table, which he'd noticed she always did when she was in conversation. A habit that, in the current era, registered as almost ostentatious courtesy. She's okay? Lena asked. Clay dogs, he said. She's making clay dogs. Of course she is. Something warmed in her expression. How old did you say? 7, 8 in March. What's she like? He opened the menu, though he wasn't really looking at it. Like he thought about how to compress Maya into words, which was impossible. She's very serious about certain things. She has opinions about how her eggs should be cooked, and she will not compromise. She's kind. Like, genuinely kind. She notices when people are sad, and she does something about it, without being taught to. He looked up. Last month, our neighbor, 2 doors down, older guy, lives alone. She made him a drawing out of nowhere. Just because she noticed he looked sad one day, Lena's expression had shifted into something unguarded. She sounds extraordinary, she said. She is. He closed the menu. I know every parent says that, but you're right anyway. He looked at her. You don't have kids. No. Simple. I thought about it, before. After the accident, she moved her water glass slightly. It became one of those things that felt too complicated to pursue. And then it became one of those things I stopped thinking about, because I'd moved it too far into the complicated column. Is that a regret? She considered the question with evident seriousness. It's a question, she said finally. I'm not sure I've resolved it enough to call it a regret. It's something I notice sometimes. Looking at people like Maya, apparently, she picked up the menu. I don't know if that means I want it, or if I just recognize what I chose to let go. They ordered. They ate slowly, without the efficiency of the morning diner. The candle between them guttered when the door opened and people came in from the cold, and the room was warm and loud enough that they were in a kind of private space despite being in public. The COO, Ethan said, after a stretch of comfortable quiet. What are you going to do? Monday, she said. I'm going to walk into that boardroom, metaphorically speaking, and I'm going to make it very clear that I run my own company, and that if Gerald feels the need to build consensus behind my back, he should build it somewhere else. She said it cleanly, without venom. What he did was a power move premised on the assumption that I'm weakening, that my situation makes me a liability. Are you going to tell them? About the prognosis? She looked at him steadily. No, not yet. Not on Gerald's timeline. She picked up her wine glass. But eventually, yes, because I refused to let my company find out about something I should have told them, and I refuse to let fear dictate when I disclose it. That's brave, he said. That's just correct, she said. Brave would be if I didn't want to do it. I'm going to want to do it. I'm just working up to wanting to. He looked at her. There was something he wanted to say, and he took a moment to figure out what it was. I think you're the most self-aware person I've ever met in a parking lot at 5 in the morning, he said. She looked at him across the candlelight. And this time, the warmth in her face didn't retract. That's the most specific compliment I've ever received, she said. He woke up at 7 without an alarm. This had not happened in years. He lay in the loft of the cabin and listened to the quiet, a different quiet than the one at home, without the ambient hum of a neighborhood, without the subconscious monitoring he always did for the sound of Maya stirring. Just silence, and then wind, and then birds doing something distant. He lay there for a while. He didn't pick up his phone immediately. Eventually, he climbed down from the loft and made coffee, and stood on the porch in the cold with a blanket around his shoulders. The mountain was doing something spectacular in the early light. The entire east face lit up in a pink that deepened toward gold, and then settled into a blinding white as the sun cleared the ridge. He went inside and got his sketchbook. He'd packed it without fully deciding to. It was one of those unconscious inclusions, the hand making a decision the mind hadn't ratified yet. He'd put it at the bottom of the bag and then put other things on top of it, so he'd have an excuse not to use it if he didn't want to. He sat on the porch with the blanket and the coffee and the sketchbook and started drawing the mountain. He wasn't good anymore in the way he'd been good. The lines were tentative at first, uncertain in the way that happens when a skill has been unused, not gone, exactly, but stiff, like waking something up. He kept going. The uncertainty in the lines shifted gradually toward something more deliberate. He drew for an hour. He had 2 pages, neither of them good, and both of them his. Lena texted at 9. Trail by the reservoir. Paved. They plow it in winter. Interested? He texted back. Yes, give me 30 minutes. They met at the trailhead. She was already there when he arrived, the camera case on her lap, her breath fogging in the still cold. The trail ran along the edge of a frozen reservoir, the ice thick and white under a thin layer of new snow. It was wide enough for the chair, and the plowing had been thorough, not perfect, but manageable. They walked, moved. She pushed. He walked beside her, at her pace rather than his. There was no pretense of conversation at first. Just the sound of her chair on packed snow and their breathing, and the creak of ice somewhere far out on the reservoir. When the temperature shifted, she took photographs. More freely today, she still had the moments of hesitation, the camera raised and then lowered, but fewer of them. He watched her work without making a performance of watching. She'd chosen a longer lens this morning. He didn't know enough about photography to know why, but he could see that it changed the relationship between what she was framing and the distances involved. Once, she stopped and raised the camera toward the opposite shore and held very still. The shutter clicked once. She looked at the screen. She looked at him. "Come look at this," she said. He leaned over the back of her chair. On the small screen, the far shore, the tree line dark against the white, and in the foreground blurred, abstract the edge of the reservoir trail curving away. It was beautiful in the way that good photographs are beautiful. Which is to say, it showed you something that was right there, and that you somehow hadn't fully seen. "That's a good photograph," he said. She looked at it a moment longer. "It's not terrible," she said. But something in her voice was different. Softer. They made it to the far end of the trail and turned back. On the return, the sun had shifted, and the light was different, warmer, fuller, and she shot more, working quickly now, more confident. He walked behind her for a stretch, which gave him an angle to see the mountains over her shoulder as she worked. He thought about the sketchbook. About what it had felt like to use it this morning. The awkwardness of it. The slow return of something he'd thought was further away than it was. "I drew this morning," he said. She stopped. She looked back at him over her shoulder. "Architecture?" she asked. "Mountain," he said. "The one I can see from the porch. I'm not good anymore the way I was. But you did it." "I did it." She held his gaze for a moment. And what moved across her face was something he didn't try to name, just noted. Quietly. And kept to himself. "Good," she said. They kept walking. The last afternoon was overcast. The clouds had moved in by noon, and the snow would come again by evening. Which meant the mountains were visible as shapes, rather than details, muted, soft, like something half-remembered. They spent part of it in the cabin. His cabin, which had a larger common area, and a fireplace he'd finally figured out how to use that morning. She brought her laptop. He brought his sketchbook. Neither of them said much for long stretches, which was a different kind of comfortable than anything else about the last 2 days. She reviewed photographs. He could see, from across the room, that there were more than he'd realized she'd been shooting all day, every time he'd turned away or not been watching. The screen showed them in sequences: the reservoir, the trail, the mountains at different hours, a close-up of something he couldn't identify from where he sat. He drew. He was on his 4th page now, and the 4th was better than the 3rd, and the 3rd was better than the first 2. The mountain from this angle, with the overcast light, was softer and harder to pin down, and in some ways more interesting. "What happens when you get back?" she asked at some point. He looked up. "Back to everything," she said. "Maya comes home. Work. The routine. It'll be the same," he said. "It's always the same." She looked at him with a slight tilt of her head that meant she didn't quite accept this. "It won't be exactly the same," she said. "You drew. That's different. One morning of drawing doesn't, Ethan." She said it quietly, and it stopped him. It was the first time she'd used his first name without thinking about it, and they both seemed to notice. "You know that's not what I mean. I mean the fact of having started. The fact of knowing it's still there." She looked back at her screen. "That's not nothing." He didn't argue. "What about you?" he asked. "I have Gerald on Monday." She said it without visible anxiety, which he'd come to understand was not the absence of feeling but the management of it. "And I have more photographs than I've taken in 6 years. And I need to figure out what to do with that." She scrolled through something on her screen. "I think I need to call someone. There's a woman who used to represent my work. She may have moved on. She may have forgotten me." A pause. That's a fear I can address by simply calling her, which is interesting to notice. Are you going to? Yes, she said. Simply. Without hedging, he looked at her. The firelight was doing something to the angles of her face. The afternoon light through the window was doing something else. He was thinking, with the particular clarity that comes at the end of a trip when you can see something almost whole before it breaks back into its component parts, that he had not expected this. Any of it. He had expected 4 days of silence and some version of recovery. And instead, he'd had 2 days of someone who said true things out loud and didn't apologize for them. He'd said true things too. Things he hadn't said to anyone. I was wrong about something, he said. She looked up. At the beginning. I thought he stopped. Tried again. I thought coming up here alone was the only version of this that would work. That the whole point was the alone. And now? Now I think maybe, he looked at the fire. I think maybe the alone isn't the thing I needed. I think I needed to stop performing. To stop being useful to someone for a few days. He looked at her. You're the first person in a long time that I haven't been useful to. She was very still. You drove me, she said. You drove with me, he said. There's a difference. Something moved through her expression. She let him see it, which he'd come to understand was a choice she made deliberately, because everything about her was deliberate. Yes, she said. There is. They left at 7 in the morning. The snow had come again overnight, serious this time. 4 inches, still falling, and the road down was slower than the road up. He drove carefully. She sat in the passenger seat with the camera case on her lap and her coffee, and didn't attempt to fill the silence. About 40 minutes out of Aspen, as the road descended and the valley widened below them, she said, "Can I show you something?" He glanced at her. She was holding the camera. She turned it and held the screen toward him. He looked for a second, then back at the road. He looked again. Just a moment, just enough. It was him. He was standing at the viewpoint railing from the previous afternoon. The mountains behind him. The late light on his face. He didn't know she'd taken it. He hadn't felt it happen, but there he was, not posed, not performing, not managing anything. Just standing. Just there, his face turned slightly toward the mountains, with an expression that, looking at it from outside, he could only describe as open. He turned back to the road. When did you? Yesterday, she said. Before you saw me taking them. She looked at the image. You can tell me to delete it. He drove for a moment. Don't delete it, he said. She put the camera away. The valley expanded below them, wide and white and enormous. And the clouds were doing something dramatic over the eastern range, breaking up slowly, letting long fingers of light through in different places at once. He drove and watched the road, and in his peripheral vision, he could see her watching the light. I'm going to call my mother when I get back, he said. Ask her to take Maya a few more times. A weekend, maybe, once a month. That's good, Lena said. I'm not doing it to, he stopped. Organized the thought. I'm not doing it because I want to date someone or because I want to fill some gap. I'm doing it because I need to have something that's mine, even if it's just drawing for an hour on a Saturday morning. Yes, she said. Maya will be okay, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Maya will be better than okay, Lena said. Maya is going to have a father who is a whole person. That's what children need, actually. Not someone who has sacrificed everything. A pause. Someone who is genuinely there, because they still have something left. He thought about that. He thought about it for the next 15 miles. And you, he said. Monday, you'll be okay. I'll be exactly who I am, she said. Which is, as it turns out, enough. He glanced at her quickly. She was looking out the windshield, the mountains on the horizon beginning to flatten as they descended toward the eastern plains. That took a while to get to, he said. Yes, she said. Everything does. They drove. The snow had stopped. The road was wet and shining, and the sun, when it appeared through the clouds, turned the entire surface of it into something almost luminous. He drove through it, and she was quiet beside him, and neither of them had any particular need to say anything else, because the things that had needed to be said had been said, and the ones that hadn't yet those, too, had time. Denver appeared on the horizon in the early afternoon. The skyline first, and then the suburbs, and then familiar roads and familiar intersections and familiar sounds, horns, the rhythm of traffic, the specific light of a city, after the wide emptiness of the mountains. He pulled into her driveway at 1:50. She opened the door. He got out and retrieved the folded chair and opened it and handed it to her, or, rather, positioned it, while she transferred from seat to chair with the efficiency he'd come to see as simply her way of moving through the world. She took the suitcase handle. She was heading up her ramp before he'd closed the truck's back hatch. At the door, she stopped. She turned. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her from the driveway. "Thank you," she said, "for not making me ask twice." He thought about the parking lot at 5 in the morning. The snow. The way she'd appeared out of the dark with a suitcase and said, "I'm coming with you," like it was a thing that had already been decided. "You didn't really ask at all," he said. She almost smiled. The full version of it. "No," she said, "I didn't." She went inside. He stood in the driveway for a moment. His own house was 20 feet to the left, the windows dark, the mailbox probably full, the interior exactly as he'd left it. He'd call his mother. He'd pick up Maya tomorrow morning. He'd go to work on Monday and do what needed doing. And Tuesday and Wednesday would be Tuesday and Wednesday. And none of that would be different. Except, he walked to his own door. He unlocked it. He put the duffel down in the entryway. On the kitchen counter, where he always left his keys, he set down the sketchbook instead. Left it there, in the open, where he'd see it. Then he went to make coffee. Outside, through the kitchen window, he could see the light on her side of the house, just a single window, glowing warm in the gray winter afternoon. The kind of light that meant someone was home, the kind of light that meant someone was still there. He stood at the window while the coffee brewed. He thought about the photograph she'd taken, his face turned toward the mountains. Open, he thought. I didn't know I still looked like that. He thought, good. The coffee finished. He poured it. He took it to the kitchen table and sat down the same table, the same chair. But he did not feel the same. The house was quiet in the afternoon. It was quiet, and the light was the light of a winter afternoon in Denver, and Maya would be home tomorrow with clay dogs and new opinions about eggs, and Monday would come. He was not afraid of Monday. He opened the sketchbook to a blank page. He began to draw.